Hi everyone, my name's Lily and I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia's State of Mind. And today I'm bringing you my July wrap up. I feel a little bit better in July, mostly because when I filmed my June wrap up, it was like the hottest it's ever been. And I feel like in July it's really tapered off in terms of heat. So I just feel a little bit more calm and collected, I guess. So let me just talk to you about how July was. The first thing that I always talk about are what I made. In July, I made a ton of different things, a lot of which I do not have for you to. So the first thing is that I made a huge amount of coasters. I basically gave coasters to everybody I knew in July. And they're not with me anymore. I did finish up this slip over though. It's not entirely done. Here it is. I'm really pleased with it, and I finished up the bottom 2x2 rib. I haven't done the finishing bits for the shoulders or the neck yet, so that will be a project for August. I understand now why people have multiple works in progress, because I am already itching to do something different. So I've already picked the next project. I picked the next yarn. I'm very excited. I'm almost so excited that I want to start now, but I really should finish this. I try not to have too many things going on at once. But my max allowance for myself is 2. So it'd still be okay if I started it, but I don't know if I will. So that's what I made in July. How was July in general? As I said, I just felt a little bit better in terms of focus because it was not as hot. That being said, though, I made an Instagram post a week or so ago. July was a really intensely stressful month emotionally and sort of for my larger unit, not just sort of me, but soon my family and friends, specifically more my family. So that was really hard in July. I felt like my focus, even though it was cooler in temperature, my focus was always split, and I found it really hard to read in July. I did read. I did make it, but it just felt like everything was taking longer, and I just felt myself having a harder time focusing, not even just literally focusing on the words upon the page, but also kind of focusing and being drawn into stories. I felt really bad for every book I read in July because it's hard when you're in those kind of really high emotionally stressful stress periods of your life for things to kind of permeate that stress. At least for me, I'll be enjoying a book, but it won't fully kind of transport me because I'll be kind of just like, oh, I have this thing to do later. I'm waiting for this response back. I don't know what's going to happen with XYZ. And it just becomes really hard to enjoy things and everything in life. So that was really hard in July. Hopefully August will be better. Fingers crossed. But anyway, that's kind of how July was, and I had a really hard time focusing on reading, even though I did find a lot of favorites. So let me just show you all the physical books that I read in July. Here is the stack, and look at all the purple. I am just loving the colors in this stack. Just in case anyone is seeing this as well, there is the Night Circus. I'm going to be doing a whole full-length video review for this coming soon, so I'm not going to talk about this. But I will talk about some of the stats and some of my favorites. Statistics-wise, I think last month was honestly one of the best months I've ever had, and this month was one of the worst. Not the worst, but one of the worst. I fell short on all my statistics. So, for example, I only read 18% of the books in July with queer characters as main characters, and 41% of my July reads featured characters of color as main characters. So honestly, not great. My target, in case anyone is new here, is 33% and 50%, and so that's just not it. I gotta say, I really struggled in July, so that might be it. But I did read some really great books, and I just want to chat about them with you today. The only YA book that I'm going to chat about is The Great Misfortune of Stella Sedgwick. This one was the perfect blend of like Bridgerton, of Pride and Prejudice. It has this historical fiction romance. I was going to say contemporary romance, but no. Historical fiction romance. But it was such a great read. I love historical fiction books, specifically by marginalized creators that talk about the presence of marginalized voices throughout history. I think that's one of those things that we can kind of see in period pieces that is just totally overlooked. But the amount of marginalized voices of all sorts that have always existed. And The Great Misfortune of Stella Sedgwick definitely fits the bill. And it also talks about the challenges. It talks about not only the challenges of growing up without any other marginalized voices near us, without anyone else who looks like us, and also growing up in communities where it's only people who look like us or people who share the same marginalizations and feeling the pressure of not fitting into other parts of society. It talks about both of these different experiences. It has a romance in it as well. It talks about trying to figure out what our path forward is. This becomes also more meaningful because Stella is not sure how she can secure her fortune, her inheritance, her future, while also maintaining true to who she is. So I've done a great job telling you everything I loved about the book and an awful job at telling you what this book is about. But basically, Stella dreams to become a writer. She was also taken in by it's not like a family friend when basically her mom worked for this family, and so she got to know both the family and the kids in the family, and so she ends up through a series of kind of events getting an inheritance from that family, even though she does not expect it. But to get an inheritance, it would be a lot easier if she was married, and Stella doesn't care. She doesn't want to be married at all. She wants to be a writer, and so she's having to figure out, is it worth trying to get into this situation, to get into a marriage just to get my inheritance? Like, is that future worth it enough to trade security over perhaps happiness, or security over, how I feel and my own kind of agency? Are all of these things worth it? And so I really loved this book. And now I'm going to talk about the adult fantasy picks. I think they're all fantasy picks. Yeah, the adult fantasy books. And the first one that I want to chat about is the next one in my stack, the other purple book. It is Paladin's Grace. And Paladin's Grace was so good. These, I think, are reissued covers. They've been out for a while. I'm not sure when they actually first came out. In 2020. So they came out 5 years ago, roundabout. And I loved this one so much. It makes this perfect balance between being swoony while also being heartfelt. Basically, there are these two main characters. One is a paladin. The paladin's religion, or not the deity of the paladin's religion, has died. We're not really sure why, but I'm sure it's going to be explained more in other books from this series. And so he's kind of adrift and also sort of at risk of going berserk, which is kind of when you go into this battle haze and you start kind of destroying and being prone to violence. And then we have a perfumer, Grace, who has her own sort of backstory, her own history. And through a weird twist of events, not only do they meet, but they also get kind of embroiled up in this pseudo assassination attempt. And it kind of trickles down from there to figure out how they can prove that Grace is not responsible or not at all related to this, while also having other things happening in the city. There's also like a serial killer murder happening in the city. Grace has some past ways that her past comes back as well to haunt her as well. And also Stephen is trying to figure out, is he more than just a paladin? And so I'm going to talk now about why I love this book. And one of the things is basically about Stephen. Can he be more than kind of just what he was intended to be, his purpose, his paladin purpose? Is he allowed to have more happiness, more things in his life than just, his old obligations? And for Grace as well, because of her past, she's kind of used to having one foot out the door at all times. She's used to having to be on her own, but it's hard for her to really sort of embrace everybody around her and embrace the things that could be, the possibilities of what could be. And so I really loved both of their different character journeys. We see through both of their perspectives. This was so swoony. I love also this little essentially fantasy fair character. This was so swoony and this was so atmospheric. I ended up devouring it, like just actually reading more than taking notes, which made my review writing simultaneously enjoyable, also kind of hard. to write. I cannot wait for the rest of the series. There are 3 other books. I already looked at the synopsis of it though, and it doesn't always continue with Stephen and Grace. The other ones I think are other side characters. So I'm excited for that one, and I loved the way that we're seeing the world but still intrigued for more of the world to come. So I had to recommend that one. The next one that I want to talk about is 7 Recipes for Evolution, which I love this book so much. Basically, Elle recommended it to me. I have to thank Elle. Also, please go and follow Elle on social media. But Elle recommended 7 Recipes for Evolution, and it was fantastic. I loved this mix of culinary fantasy. I loved also the way that it talks about the line between insurrection and rebellion, insurrection and revolution, and also this line that we have between the individual to the larger. Like, why should I care about the larger rebellion or the larger world when I'm only concerned with how I am, with how the people I love and everything like that is? So that is a huge theme. Also, I really, really enjoyed the world. It was so unique, so fresh, so fantastical. I loved this idea of the way that we're able to look at the social structures within the world. So basically, actually, let me take a step back and let me tell you what the book is about. So basically, our main character is a butcher. These butchers are trying to harvest meat from these kinds of magical, almost god-ish like creatures. They are gigantic, and they harvest this meat, and this meat is used in special recipes. So it's not only that, every time you cook, you have to use a special meat. There are normal recipes, and then there are greater recipes. And so Patrick wants to become a chef. Patrick has always had a great sense of flavor and a great nose sense, I guess. But it's this weird catch-22 where the only way that you can become a greater chef, the only way you can become a chef, capital C, is to come up with a greater recipe. The common, which is Patrick is a common, the common are prohibited from having this. Well, okay, they're not actually prohibited, they just cost a ton of money, and the common are most likely always indentured to various entities. And so it's this catch-22 where they're not technically disallowed from being it, but you'd have to have access to resources, which you would never do. So it's obviously a way in which resources, power, and sort of fantastical magic are all further solidified by the other class and by the higher classes. And so Patrick, through a series of events, which you'll have to read the book, ends up becoming a capital C chef. And so also because of this, the rebellion, the revolution, to see Patrick as this symbol, because Patrick is a common, even though the whole kind of aristocracy kind of wants to erase that. The revolution wants to use this as a symbol to try to say, hey, like, we can do this as well, and to kind of show the ways that the system is crumbling. And so that's kind of the main premise. And so what I loved about it, it's told from a frame narrative. We're seeing Patrick talk about the journey, talk about what kind of led to all of these different events from the future. And so Patrick is reflecting on the past and how everything got to that. And so Patrick is on trial. That's the whole premise. I don't want to give away any further things. I basically devoured it. I ended up reading it so fast. I loved it. Basically, after 5%, I was basically in love with this. After 10%, I decided I needed to have a physical copy for my own library, and it's obviously my favorites. And the last one I want to talk about is one that I have here, except it's on the bottom, and it is The Second Death of Locke. This one was so good. The swooning, the tension, the angst, the pining in this book was fabulous. Basically, in this world, you have wells who have kind of this magical, the essence of the magic within them. They're always paired with a mage who pulls from that magic, which is not an infinite. It is finite, confined to themselves. Gray is also in love with Kier. That's kind of one of the swoons, the tension, the angst, the pining. And so they've been kind of paired together on the front lines for a really long time. Essentially, they're kind of just over it, right? You don't have the agency, you don't have the power. It's this weird dynamic where they're reliant, like that the force, the magic is basically the empire, the country, the kingdom, whatever is reliant on it, but they don't really have any power, even though they have the magical power, because they're always under orders. They're always trying to do these other things. And so basically they are put onto a mission to go retrieve what they think is the heir to this other country, this other kingdom, which was the kingdom that wasn't responsible for all, like, the origin of all magic. So they are trying to go there, and they have to help this person and bring this person somewhere else, I guess. And so that is what ends up happening. And there's a little bit of a hiccup there, because the heir that they're supposed to be helping foster, the heir that they're supposed to be transporting, is supposed to be the heir to the magical kingdom, as I said, except they know that she's not the heir because Gray is. So this one was so beautiful. It was just heart-rending and just emotional and magical all at once. I've been following Tori for a really, really, really long time, before Tori was even published. So I'm just so in awe and so proud of this book. I ended up reading it so quickly, which is impressive because this is a big book. But I just loved the character work in this. I loved the way that we can see a character who is struggling with love and loyalty and sacrifice, and wondering, like, Gray has experienced so much loss in her life, and so she's kind of done with being the heir. But then throughout the book, she has to realize that, can I be done? Can I be done with it? Right? Like, as she sees this other person who is supposed to be the heir, is she willing to have this happen to this person? Is she willing to make the sacrifices necessary to protect her family, her found family, her friends, her country? Is it bigger than her? Does she have a duty? Does she have a responsibility? Her whole kind of life and loss and family and past were shaped by duty and obligation. And now, as the well for the mage, and, you know, part of that kingdom, and the militia or the army in that kingdom, that's also sort of shaped by duty and obligation. And so you're kind of just like, I just want Gray to have a break. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's just not in our control. And for Gray kind of has to figure out where she wants to draw the line. Where is the line between when we will say nothing and when we will say something? And I found that incredibly compelling. Obviously, also, the romantic tension was a very compelling reason to keep me there. But in general, I found Gray's character dynamic incredibly captivating. I cannot wait for the next book in the series. I love this to pieces. This is so special to me. And finally, I want to talk about one actual honorable mention, and it is a YA book. So sneaky of me. I like to kind of talk about sequels or series finales in a separate part of the video, because so much of a book is tied to how the previous books were. And so I want to talk about Once a Villain, because I adored Only a Monster and Never a Hero, and now Once a Villain so much. I think the world is so unique. It's so fantastical. And it is so, like, every time I read it, I was reading Once a Villain. Every time I was reading it and something would happen, a twist, a reveal, I was just so awestruck at how someone could think of this. I know it's been a little bit of time for Once a Villain versus Never a Hero, at least for me, right? That's one of the downsides to being a book reviewer, is obviously you get to read books really early, and that is great. I love that about what I do, but at the same time, it means waiting for the sequel or waiting for the series ender is just also more painful. So I feel like it's been a really long time, even though maybe it hasn't been, but Once a Villain was the perfect series finale. It is so well crafted. Every time I'm like, I'm not really sure where this world is going to go, but we continuously keep going, and it was so perfect. I can't tell you anything about it, because obviously if you haven't read Never a Hero, it would be spoilers. I just love this series of timey-wimey YA fantasy, which the first one talks a lot about biracial identity, and the first one talks a lot about identity, and it just has morphed now into this beautiful story about time and choice and responsibility and what we will or will not stand for. So I just wanted to do like a little brief how I felt about Once a Villain. And so that brings me to the end of my July wrap up. Let me know down below what your favorite read from July was, and I will see you in the next video. Have a really great rest of your reading day, week, month, and year.